My name is Cora. I'm 29, and apparently, I'm the kind of woman who shatters a perfectly good marriage because she had the audacity to want more. They don't say it to my face, of course, not our old friends, not my family, but I see it in the slight, pitying tilt of their heads. The way they look at Samuel now, as if he were a saint who endured a great, senseless tragedy. And me? I'm the tragedy, the senseless part, but they don't understand. They can't. They never lived in our apartment. Not really. They visited, admiring the clean lines and the cool, slate-gray walls Samuel had chosen. They complimented the minimalist furniture, the way sunlight fell unobstructed across the polished concrete floors. They called it serene, a sanctuary. For me, it was a beautiful, soundproof box. A glass house where you could see the world, but your own screams would never reach the outside. Samuel and I were married for 6 years. He's a university historian, a man who finds profound comfort in the immutable facts of the past. His specialty is 16th century cartography. He loves maps, he loves borders, established routes, the certainty of a world laid out in ink and parchment. He lives his life the same way. Every morning, 7 o'clock, the soft whir of the coffee grinder, a single origin bean from a specific roaster downtown, 2 teaspoons of sugar, no milk. He would sit at our marble island, reading dense academic journals, his posture perfect. He was a creature of ritual, of quiet, predictable contentment. And for a long time, I convinced myself I loved that about him. That his stability was the anchor to my restless mind. I'm a freelance translator. I spend my days wrestling with the nuances of other people's words, trying to find the perfect shade of meaning. I live in the gray areas, in the spaces between languages. Samuel lived in black and white. Those last couple of years, though, felt like a slow suffocation. Our conversations became routines. The exchange of daily logistics, work, dinner, the mortgage payment, the leaky faucet. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. It was the sound of 2 people existing in the same space, but on different planes of reality. I tried. I really did. I would bring home a bottle of strange, impulsive wine. He'd look at the label, comment on the region's soil composition, and declare it interesting. I'd suggest we drive to the coast on a whim. He'd pull up a weather app and a traffic report, concluding it was more practical to go next weekend, once he'd had time to properly plan. He wasn't being unkind, he was just being Samuel. And I was slowly, quietly, dying inside from the predictability of it all. The breaking point didn't come with a crash. It came with a whisper. In a place filled with them. It was a gallery opening downtown. A new artist, a sculptor. I'd had to coax Samuel into going for weeks. He found contemporary art to be frustratingly subjective. But I loved it. I needed the chaos, the color, the raw emotion. While Samuel stood before a twisted mass of bronze and steel, discussing its structural integrity with another guest, I felt that familiar sense of invisibility. I was an accessory to his life, a decorative object in his well-ordered world. I wandered away, finding myself in front of a smaller piece. It was a chaotic tangle of driftwood, polished smooth by the sea, bound together with taut, black wire. It looked like it was in agony, beautiful and trapped. "It's screaming, isn't it?" The voice was low, right behind me. It made the hairs on my arm stand up. I turned. He was leaning against the wall, a glass of red wine in his hand. He wasn't handsome in the classical way Samuel was. His features were sharper, his hair was a dark, untamed mess, and his eyes saw things. They weren't just looking, they were absorbing. I think it is," I managed to say. "That's what I was going for," he said with a half smile. He pushed himself off the wall and extended a hand. His fingers were long, stained with what looked like clay and paint. Silas, the artist. We talked for what felt like an hour. He didn't ask what I did for a living or where I lived. He asked what music made me feel hollow. He asked what my favorite word was in any language, and why. He asked what I saw when I closed my eyes in a silent room. He listened to my answers as if they were the most important facts in the world. With every word I spoke, I felt a part of myself, a part I thought had atrophied from disuse, begin to wake up. Samuel eventually found me, his face wearing a mask of polite patience. "Cora, I was thinking we should head out. There's an early lecture I need to prepare for." The spell was broken. As we walked away, Silas caught my eye over Samuel's shoulder. He gave me a small, knowing nod. That night, I found his gallery's business card in my coat pocket. On the back, in messy, urgent handwriting, were 2 words. Keep talking. And a phone number. Lying in bed next to Samuel's steady, rhythmic breathing, I felt like a thief. I unlocked my phone, the blue light, a glaring secret in the darkness. My fingers trembled as I typed. It's Cora. From the gallery. His reply came back almost instantly. I know. The texts became phone calls. The phone calls became stolen afternoons in quiet, sun-drenched cafes Silas knew in forgotten corners of the city. He was everything Samuel was not. Spontaneous, passionate, gloriously messy. His apartment was a chaotic masterpiece of canvases, sculptor's tools, and half-finished projects. It smelled of turpentine and fresh coffee. It felt alive. With him, I felt alive. I wasn't just a translator of words. I was a person with her own stories, her own messy, complicated feelings. Silas didn't want to organize my thoughts. He wanted to dive into them. And back home, the silence began to change. It was no longer just empty. It became active. A weapon. Samuel must have known. He's too intelligent not to have noticed the shift in me, the phone I now guarded like a state secret, the vague excuses for my absences. But he never asked. Not once. Instead, a chilling new routine began. What I now call the punishment. It was a quiet, methodical campaign of perfect politeness. He started coming home exactly at 6 every evening. He would cook dinner, often my favorite dishes, the complicated ones I loved but rarely made myself. He'd set the table perfectly. How was your day, Cora? He'd ask, his voice calm, level, utterly devoid of emotion. It was maddening. I wanted a fight. I wanted accusations, jealousy, something, anything that proved he still cared enough to be angry. I got nothing. One evening, I pushed it. I came home late, deliberately leaving the scent of Silas's clove cigarettes clinging to my coat. I walked in to find Samuel reading in the living room, a plate of food covered for me on the counter. You're home, he said, not looking up from his book. Dinner's there if you're hungry. I stood there, my heart pounding. I was out with a friend, I said, my voice louder than I intended. A new friend, a sculptor. We had an amazing conversation. He turned a page. That's nice, he said to the book. I'm glad you're meeting people. The politeness was a wall of ice. I could scream and hammer against it, and all I would do is bruise my own fists. The silence in our home was no longer a void. It was a presence. It was him, watching me, waiting. He was giving me all the rope I needed, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that I would use it. My world split into 2. With Silas, life was a vibrant, saturated film. We drove to the coast on a Tuesday just to watch a storm roll in. We spent an entire night debating the meaning of a single line in a poem. Our affair turned physical, and in my mind, I didn't frame it as cheating. It was a communion. A desperate, necessary act of finding a reflection of my own soul in another person. At home, life was a black and white photograph, slowly fading to gray. Samuel's quiet war of attrition escalated. It was never overt. It was always subtle, precise. He rearranged the bookshelves in the living room. My novels, my poetry, my collections of essays, the books that felt like extensions of my own mind, were moved to a bottom shelf hidden behind his imposing rows of historical texts. He replaced the large, vibrant photograph of us laughing on our honeymoon in Lisbon that hung in the hallway. In its place, he hung a stark, black and white architectural print of a brutalist building. It was cold, geometric, and impersonal. When I asked him why, he simply said, I felt like a change. This is cleaner. He was erasing me. Not with anger, but with interior design. The most unsettling night, I came home to find the apartment dark, except for the faint glow from the living room. Music was playing, a mournful, haunting cello piece I'd never heard before. It was the kind of music that felt like a bruise. Samuel was sitting in his armchair, his back to me, perfectly still, just listening in the dark. Sam, I whispered. He didn't startle. It was as if he'd been waiting. He slowly turned his head, and in the dim light, I saw his face. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was hollow, utterly, terrifyingly empty. "What are you listening to?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He looked at me for a long moment, a moment that stretched into an eternity. For the first time, I wasn't frustrated with him. I was afraid of him. "Just an old song," he said, his voice flat. "It doesn't matter." He turned back to the window, dismissing me. And I knew then that this wasn't just a phase. He wasn't just hurt. He was gone. The man I had married had already left the building. Only his polite, hollowed-out shell remained. He never needed to find texts on my phone or follow me after work. He didn't need a private investigator. He just needed to watch me. The evidence of my betrayal was written all over my life, and he started serving it back to me, piece by silent piece. One morning, I found a single ticket stub on my nightstand. It was from the independent cinema Silas and I had gone to 2 nights before. I had carelessly thrown it in my purse and then into the trash. Now it sat there, placed perfectly in the center of the polished wood surface. A silent accusation. A week later, it was something else. Years ago, for our anniversary, I had given him a small, beautiful fountain pen, his initials engraved in the silver clip. He cherished it. I walked into his study and saw the pen lying next to an open book on his desk. The book was a dry academic text, a legal history of marital dissolution. The pen was being used as a simple bookmark. It was a message, delivered with the precision of a surgeon. "This beautiful thing you gave me is now just a tool to mark the end of us." I couldn't breathe. The air in our home was thick with unspoken words, with his meticulous, soul-crushing silence. He was holding up a mirror to my actions, and I couldn't stand the reflection. That night, I broke. He was in the kitchen, carefully washing the dinner plates. I stood in the doorway, my arms wrapped around myself. "Samuel, we have to talk." He turned off the water, dried his hands methodically on a linen towel, and faced me. His expression was neutral, patient. Like a doctor about to receive a diagnosis he already knows. "I'm listening." End quote. The speech I had been rehearsing in my head for weeks, a passionate, desperate monologue about loneliness, about feeling unseen, about my desperate need for connection, came tumbling out. I spoke of feeling like a ghost in our perfect home, of my soul withering from the lack of spontaneity. I tried to frame my affair with Silas not as a betrayal of Samuel, but as an act of self-preservation. "It wasn't about you, not really," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. "It was about me. I was disappearing. I needed to feel something, anything." I cried. I reasoned, I explained, I laid my entire, selfish, broken heart bare on the cold kitchen floor. He listened through it all. He didn't interrupt. His gaze never wavered. When I finally ran out of words, my shoulders shaking with sobs, a heavy silence filled the room. I waited for him to yell, to cry, to throw something. I waited for the explosion that had been building for months. Instead, he took a small breath and asked a single, quiet question. "Are you finished?" The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't angry, they were dismissive. My grand, dramatic tragedy, my profound emotional pain to him, it was just noise. A tedious speech that had finally, mercifully, come to an end. He had already judged me. He had already convicted me. This wasn't a trial. This was the sentencing. The sentence was delivered 2 days later. It came not in a fury, but in a manila envelope. Samuel placed it on the dining table after dinner. My name was typed neatly on the front. "I had my lawyer draw these up," he said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing a grocery list. "I believe you'll find the terms more than fair. Divorce papers." I stared at the envelope, my mind reeling. In all my self-absorbed drama, in all my fantasies of being understood or at the very least fought for, this quiet, efficient endpoint had never occurred to me. I had wanted him to fight for me. I had never considered he would simply let me go. With paperwork. You're not even going to fight?" I whispered, the words sounding pathetic even to my own ears. "Fight for what, Cora?" he asked, a flicker of something not anger, but a profound, weary sadness in his eyes. "The woman I married isn't in this room, and I have no interest in fighting for a stranger." He walked me through the documents. He was right. They were fair, generous even. The division of assets, the timeline for me to move out of the apartment, it was all laid out, clean and logical. A map for the end of our world. He was treating our marriage like a failed business venture, to be dissolved with minimal fuss, and that, more than any screaming match could, utterly broke me. I realized he hadn't just stopped loving me, he had stopped respecting me. I was no longer a partner to be negotiated with, but a problem to be efficiently solved. In a last, desperate attempt to draw blood, to get a reaction, to prove that I still had some power over him, I spat the cruelest thing I could think of. "You know, I'm glad," I said, my voice shaking with a venom born of pure panic. "Because with Silas, I finally feel alive. Truly alive." He stopped gathering his papers. He stood up straight and looked at me. Truly looked at me. For the first time in months, the emptiness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a clear, piercing pity that was 1,000 times worse than hatred. He walked over to me, stopping just a few feet away. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, but every word was a perfectly sharpened blade. "Cora," he said, "don't confuse destruction with being alive. Apisa." Then he turned, walked into his study, and quietly closed the door, leaving me alone in the ruins I had created. Freedom, it turned out, was just another kind of cage. I moved in with Silas. In my mind, this was the beginning of the real story, the passionate, art-filled life I was always meant to live. The reality was different. The spontaneous energy I had found so intoxicating was, in daily life, just a profound lack of responsibility. The chaotic apartment wasn't a sign of a brilliant, artistic mind. It was just a mess he never bothered to clean. The deep conversations about life and art became repetitive monologues about his own unrecognized genius and the commercialism of the art world. He loved the idea of me, the beautiful, trapped wife he had liberated. He was in love with the drama. But the real me, the one who worried about paying bills, who got tired, who sometimes just wanted a quiet evening at home, he had no patience for that Cora. She was boring. She was too much like the husband she had left. The passion that had felt like a wildfire burned out quickly, leaving behind nothing but smoke and cold ashes. I had torched my life for a man who was, in the end, just a fascinating, beautifully wrapped, and utterly empty box. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I saw Samuel. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was rushing home through a light drizzle, feeling that familiar, low-grade anxiety that had become the background noise of my life. I glanced across the street and saw him. He was coming out of an old, dusty antiquarian bookshop, a place he'd wanted to take me to a dozen times, a place I'd always dismissed as stuffy. He was holding a small, cloth-bound book, examining the cover with a look of quiet absorption. He wasn't with anyone. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't sad. He looked settled, calm. He looked like a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be, comfortable in his own silence. A silence that was no longer a punishment, but a peace he had reclaimed. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the street, but he didn't see me. He was just taking in the day. He zipped up his jacket, tucked the book under his arm, and walked away. His stride steady and unhurried. And I stood there on the curb, the rain starting to soak through my coat, watching him go. I had gotten what I wanted. I had broken out of the glass house. I had found my voice. But now, standing in my supposed freedom, all I could hear was the deafening echo of all the things I had destroyed. The silence in our marriage had been a quiet room. The silence in my new life was an empty universe. He was at peace, and I was just alone.